Welcome to ViralLens Report, where mysteries unfold, secrets are exposed, and the stories everyone is talking about come to life. From shocking true crime cases to unbelievable real-world events, we bring you the facts, the clues, and the twists you never saw coming. Subscribe now and join thousands of viewers uncovering the truth, one story at a time. This is ViralLens Report. Let's dive in.
What if the ransom notes were never real? What if the person demanding money had nothing to do with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance? And what if the biggest clue in this entire investigation isn't something investigators found, but something that never happened? No ransom was collected. No clear proof of life was provided. And after authorities reportedly attempted to communicate through a Bitcoin wallet connected to the ransom demand, the money was never taken. Then came silence. Complete silence. And now, investigators are left facing a disturbing possibility. Was the ransom story a genuine attempt to negotiate? Or was it a carefully constructed distraction designed to send the investigation in the wrong direction? Tonight, we take a closer look at the mystery surrounding 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie, the ransom notes that continue to divide investigators and experts, the mysterious Bitcoin wallet, the surveillance footage that could hold the identity of a suspect, and the question that remains at the center of everything. Why Nancy? Because until investigators answer that question, the mystery of her disappearance may remain impossible to solve. Nancy Guthrie's disappearance has become one of those cases where every answer seems to create another question. The 84-year-old vanished, leaving behind a family desperate for answers and investigators trying to reconstruct what happened during the critical hours surrounding her disappearance. But the biggest mystery may not simply be who took Nancy. It may be why. And that question has become even more complicated because of the ransom communications that emerged after her disappearance. According to reports surrounding the case, ransom notes were sent to media outlets, claiming that Nancy had been taken and demanding payment. On the surface, the message appeared to point toward a kidnapping for money. But investigators quickly encountered a problem. The behavior didn't completely fit the traditional pattern of a ransom kidnapping. There were questions about the authenticity of the notes, questions about who actually sent them, and questions about whether the person behind the messages truly had Nancy. Because in a typical kidnapping for ransom case, the objective is usually clear. The kidnappers want money. They want communication. They want leverage. And they want to convince the victim's family that the person they're holding is still alive. But in Nancy's case, the ransom communications have generated more questions than answers. Where was the proof of life? Why did communication appear to stop? And, perhaps most importantly, why was the money never collected? Those questions have created a divide among those examining the case. Some reports have suggested that investigators questioned whether the ransom notes were authentic. Others have indicated that at least some of the communications could potentially have been legitimate. The conflicting information has created a fog around the investigation. And when investigators can't agree on the meaning of a critical piece of evidence, they have no choice but to examine every possibility. Then there's the Bitcoin wallet. This may be one of the strangest elements of the entire case. According to reports, authorities attempted to engage with the person behind the ransom demand by sending cryptocurrency to the Bitcoin wallet associated with the communication. The move was reportedly designed to open a line of communication, a chance to see whether someone would respond, a chance to determine whether the person behind the wallet actually had information about Nancy. But the money was never collected. No response followed. And once again, silence. That silence is difficult to ignore. Because if someone had genuinely kidnapped Nancy for money, why wouldn't they take the money? Why make the demand in the first place? And if the ransom communication was fake, who created it? And what were they trying to accomplish? One possibility is that the ransom messages were an attempt to misdirect investigators. Another is that someone was trying to exploit the chaos surrounding Nancy's disappearance. And there's another possibility that is even more disturbing. The person behind the ransom communications may not have been the person responsible for Nancy's disappearance at all. If that's true, investigators may have been dealing with two separate mysteries at the same time. One involving Nancy, and another involving whoever created the ransom messages. But the uncertainty surrounding the ransom theory forces investigators to reconsider the motive. If this wasn't a straightforward kidnapping for money, then what was it? Could it have been a burglary that spiraled out of control? Could it have been a personal grudge? Could someone have developed an obsession with Nancy or her family? Or was Nancy deliberately targeted for reasons that investigators have not yet uncovered? These questions become even more important when you consider her age. Nancy was 84 years old, an elderly woman living a private life. The idea that someone would deliberately target her raises an obvious question. Why her? What did the person responsible want? What did they know about Nancy? And how much planning went into the crime? Experts examining the available surveillance footage have raised another possibility. The person seen near Nancy's home may not have been a highly experienced criminal. Instead, some experts have suggested that the suspect appeared to make mistakes. The behavior seen on camera may indicate someone who is unfamiliar with the risks of surveillance. Someone who may not have fully understood how much evidence they could leave behind. And that could be significant, because inexperienced offenders often make mistakes. They leave traces. They expose their identities. They repeat behaviors. And sometimes they talk. The surveillance footage could eventually become one of the most important pieces of evidence in this entire investigation. Investigators may be able to examine the person's height, their walking pattern, their body movements, their clothing, their physical build, even the way they approach the property. Every detail can matter, because sometimes investigators don't identify a suspect from a face. They identify them from a pattern, a movement, a habit, a detail that connects a person seen on camera to someone investigators already know. But there's another disturbing piece of evidence. Blood. Blood reportedly found near Nancy's home has led experts to consider the possibility that she may have resisted whoever came for her. If that interpretation is correct, then Nancy's disappearance may not have been peaceful. It may have involved a struggle, a confrontation, a moment when an elderly woman realized something was terribly wrong. And if Nancy fought back, that could mean the person responsible may have left behind evidence. DNA, hair, touch DNA, or other biological material. And that brings us to one of the most important questions in the case. Could modern forensic science finally identify the person responsible? Investigators may be examining DNA evidence that could eventually be processed through advanced forensic techniques and, if a usable profile is developed, potentially genetic genealogy. Technology has transformed investigations that once seemed impossible. A tiny piece of biological evidence can sometimes lead investigators to a family tree. A family tree can lead to a relative. And a relative can lead detectives to a suspect. But DNA isn't always a magic answer. Evidence can be mixed. Samples can be incomplete. And investigators must still prove how and when the DNA came to be at a crime scene. Still, if the right DNA profile exists, it could change everything. And there's another possibility investigators cannot afford to ignore. What if the person responsible has already told someone? A friend, a family member, a coworker, a romantic partner. Someone who noticed a sudden change in behavior. Someone who heard a strange story. Someone who saw something they couldn't explain. In many criminal investigations, the breakthrough doesn't come from the suspect confessing directly to police. It comes from someone close to the suspect finally deciding to speak. That's why investigators continue to rely on public tips. Because somewhere, there may be a person who knows something. Someone who remembers a conversation, a vehicle, a strange purchase, an unusual trip, a sudden change in behavior. And they may not even realize how important that information could be. But questions have also been raised about the earliest stages of the investigation. Was the crime scene preserved properly? Was every piece of evidence collected? Were investigators able to secure all the digital data they needed? In a case this complex, the first hours can be critical. Surveillance footage can disappear. Digital data can be overwritten. Physical evidence can be contaminated. And witnesses can forget details. That's why investigators often describe the early stages of a missing person investigation as a race against time. If something was missed in those first critical hours, it could become much harder to recover later. And yet, despite all these challenges, the investigation continues. Technology is advancing. Evidence is being re-examined. Surveillance footage can be enhanced. Cell phone data can be analyzed. License plate readers can reveal movements. Digital records can reconstruct timelines. And DNA technology continues to evolve. The person responsible may believe the investigation has gone quiet. They may believe investigators have forgotten. They may even believe they got away with it. But investigators don't need the public to see every move they're making. Sometimes the most important work happens in silence. A forensic laboratory, a computer screen, a database, a detective reviewing a timeline for the 100th time. And then, one detail suddenly stands out. One connection, one name, one piece of DNA, one person who decides to talk. And the entire case changes. But for now, the biggest questions remain unanswered. Who took Nancy Guthrie? Why was she targeted? Were the ransom notes genuine? Who controlled the Bitcoin wallet? Why was the money never collected? Was the person seen on surveillance acting alone? And most importantly, what happened to Nancy after she disappeared? These are the questions investigators must ultimately answer. And until they do, the mystery remains. But one thing is certain. The truth is somewhere. It may be hidden in the DNA. It may be buried inside digital evidence. It may be captured in a frame of surveillance footage that investigators haven't fully understood yet. Or it may exist in the memory of someone who knows exactly what happened and has remained silent. For Nancy's family, the waiting continues. For investigators, the search continues. And for the person responsible, if they are watching this case unfold, there is one thing they should remember. Investigations don't always end when the headlines disappear. Sometimes they begin to move faster, quietly, behind the scenes. And when the right piece of evidence finally emerges, there may be nowhere left to hide. The mystery of Nancy Guthrie remains unsolved. But the case is not over. And until the truth is found, the questions will continue. What do you believe happened to Nancy? Was this truly a kidnapping for ransom? Was the ransom story a deliberate distraction? Or is there a completely different motive hiding beneath the surface? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the person watching this video knows something that investigators don't. And one tip, one conversation, one decision to finally speak could be the clue that brings the truth into the light.